Goswami. Here in Alachua, we have two particular families, but one family that really stands out. There's a couple of brothers, 2 or 3 sisters, an aunt, an uncle, 5 or 6 cousins, 3 or 4 nephews and nieces, 6 or 7 grandchildren. It's all in the same family. And they're all very, very nice devotees. Very enthusiastic, very devoted, very involved like this. And the potency of that devotional service extends throughout the family because the family themselves embrace this mood of devotional commitment. So we see this in the life as we speak about Jiva Goswami tonight. Jiva Goswami's grandfather was Kumaradev. Kumaradev, we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, was the father of 6 sons. 3 sons were very prominent devotees. Those 3 would be Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, and Anupam. Anupam or Ballabha. These 3 were the very strong disciples of, very strong sons, in some sense we might say disciple, but for the sake of this presentation, strong sons of Kumaradev. And of the 3, and the other 3 sons included, only one had a child, and that would be Anupam, and or Vallabha, whichever you prefer to call him. Each, as we mentioned in the life of both Sanatana and Rupa, they each had a series of names throughout their life, ending with Rupa and Sanatana. And Vallabha's son was a wonderful young boy by the name of Jiva. So Jiva had this background of these 2 very, very gifted uncles, very, very highly devotional personalities. All through their life, they were of this nature. And of his father, Anupam, Ballabha, being also a very advanced devotee. Anupam actually left his home and went with Rupa and Sanatana. Now, the circumstances of the family, as we've mentioned before, the sons, they were all engaged in the service of the Badshah Hussain Shah. And he was the Muslim leader of the government at that time. And he had somehow, by coercion or trick or threatening, engaged many, many Vaishnavas at that time in the service of the government there. And they were living in this place, Ramkeli, which was their home and capital. And they were paid very handsomely. It's not that he engaged them in this service, it's not that he engaged them in this service and just, didn't take care of them. He was expecting them to manage his kingdom. A treasurer, prime minister, positions of this. So he paid them very well. And as a result, they lived a very, very comfortable life. Very wealthy surroundings and a very, very good level of comfort, which they used to enhance their Krishna consciousness. As we mentioned when we spoke about Rupa and Sanatana separately, that both of their homes were great palaces and mansions, of which they had lakes in the front of, which they called Radhakund and Shamakund, and the different wooded areas around they named after the different Vrindavan forests. So in this way they used their facilities to be able to enhance their Krishna consciousness. So into this environment was born this young boy, Jiva. Now, as I mentioned, he was the only one in this opulent household. So, he was, there was nothing lacking, you would say, in the bringing up of this boy. Nothing lacking at all. The house was actually, because of him being the only child, the house was illuminated by the presence of his childhood activities. His complexion was golden and very beautiful. His eyes were like the expanded petals of a lotus flower, as it describes. It mentions that every part of his body was graced with the lustrous, radiant splendor, and that all of the different manifestations of a Mahapurush were seen within his bodily form. A high nose, broad forehead, broad chest, long arms that reach down beyond normal like that. These are all the symptoms, some of the symptoms described to a Mahapurush. So In this way, he really was, as we've used in the discussions of Narottam, the center of the entire community. Now, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to Ramkeli. He specifically came for the purpose of delivering Rupa and Sanatan. We know from the previous pastimes that they had written him, and he came and told them, I've come simply to deliver you. While he was there, Jiva Goswami, of course, was blessed with getting the darshan of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, although at the time he was simply a baby. Because remember, he was a very young boy. He was the youngest of the Goswamis. He was a good, I should have looked this up, but he was a good 20 to 30 years younger than the other Goswamis. Very, very young. So, in this way, he, as a young child, was able to crawl around and be around, walking around, just like little children do, the area where Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was. And it mentions that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in a very gentle and loving way, took his lotus feet and placed the dust from his feet upon the head of Jiva Goswami. And not only that, but Mahaprabhu pointed to the child and he said, this child will be the future preceptor of the entire Gaudiya Sampradaya. Jiva Goswami, it mentions, was so moved by this experience with the Lord, even though just a baby, that the impression of the form of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu fixed itself in his mind. And that as he grew up, when he would be eating, when he would be lying down, when he would be awake or asleep or doing anything, this impression was fixed in his mind of the form of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He'd meditate like this. Now, we know later that his father and his two uncles eventually renounced and left. And they went ultimately to Vrindavan. And in this way, they left the child, Jiva, to be the only person to take care of his aging mother. And it mentions that in the family home, his face was never without tears, due to feeling the separation not only of his father and uncles, but more importantly, the separation of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And the mother also was feeling the same way, because she was, of course, also a devotee. It wasn't that she was not involved in this. So she was there, and she was always crying at the separation of her husband and her brother-in-laws, who were very advanced devotees, and of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Jiva was also feeling in the same way. And so in this way, the entire family life was filled with this mood of separation. So it mentions that this sadness was enhanced even more so when it came to be known that his father, Vallabha, had departed from this world into the next on the banks of the Ganga before reaching Vrindavan. So at that point, he simply could not be consoled, and he lost all consciousness, fell to the ground upon hearing of his father's departure. And then after that, he was constantly in a state of separation. Now, of course, prior to that news of his father's departure, he was receiving his education. And there's a wonderful description. I'm going to supplement some of this evening with some reading from the Bhakti Ratnakar. You've heard me mention this book many times. This is what you might refer to as the second generation of Chaitanya literatures, because it deals with the pastimes of the immediate devotees of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There's a very wonderful description here of the youth of Jiva Goswami. So I'm going to read this directly from the Bhakti Ratnakar. It starts off describing his wealth here. In the heart of Jiva Goswami, the thought was always there of Sanatana Goswami and Rupa Goswami, who had left and gone to Vrindavan. Jiva was surrounded by the greatest of opulence. He wore fine clothing. He wore jeweled ornaments. He slept in a wonderful silken bed. He enjoyed the finest of foods. But in his mind he had renounced all of these. They did not please his heart. He would not hear of any news of the government affairs or of anything else. Seeing Jiva's action, a group of wise men affectionately said to themselves and discussed, "O my brothers, among Kumardev's children only 3 sons were learned in Vaisnava scriptures. Those 3 were Sanatan, Rupa, and Vallabha, and they renounced everything. They are indifferent to material things. How wonderful is their renunciation! When on the banks of the Ganga, Bala departed and went to the other world, Jiva began to lament bitterly. Jiva's heart was never attracted to material wealth. At that moment, his heart broke hearing of his father's departure. One man said, "One day I saw him in a secluded place. Tears were streaming from his eyes. Without stopping, he floated in an ocean of tears." Someone else said, "Oh, my brother, I know that is the truth. Please know that Lord Krishna has certainly given his mercy to Jiva. Even when he was young at heart, he was very profound. He considered Srimad Bhagavatam to be his very life. He always swam and played in the ocean of topics about Lord Krishna. He feared to talk about anything else. He had no power to talk about anything else." Another said, "One day, when he was unseen by others, I saw him call out, 'Sri Krishna Chaitanya,' and fall unconscious to the ground. He rolled on the ground. He could not be peaceful. His face and his chest floated in the flooding river of tears that flowed from his eyes. Weeping and weeping, again and again he lamented. Seeing his sad condition, who would not feel his own heart torn to shreds?" Someone else said, "Oh, my brothers, in a very few days I fear Jiva will leave his home. I think this must be within his heart." Someone else said, "How will this delicate boy leave home and wander like a sannyasi of renunciation?" Another person said, "Don't worry, the spiritual love he feels is very powerful and will protect him." Another said, "He is like a lamp shining in the community of brahmanas. If he leaves, we will be covered by the blinding darkness." With anxious hearts, the men spoke in this way. Then, leaving Jiva Goswami's family, they all returned to their homes. So, in this way, this wonderful description is given of Jiva Goswami's intense level of devotion to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and to the path of devotional service. So in this mood, he carried out his responsibilities. He studied and was trained in the proper schools of thought under the local pundits. He became very proficient in grammar, and poetry, and rhetoric, and nyaya, all the different schools of logic and teaching. Watching his expression and his ability at learning, though, all of his teachers were amazed. One teacher in particular predicted that he will be a very saintly person. This teacher said, "Such brilliance is not often found in a child so young as this. No doubt he will be a very high-souled person." So Srimad Bhagavatam at this time came to be the life and soul of Jiva Goswami. Krishna Katha was the only thing that filled him with happiness. And it says that no one dared to come near him and speak anything other than Krishna Katha. They were afraid to, because he would become completely angry on hearing these other things. Now, just a little sub-note here. At that time, as I mentioned, he gained complete expertise in all the different fields of writing and logic and all. This benefited him very greatly, because later in his life he composed a grammar that was in Sanskrit, and this was an offering that he made to the Lord. And this composition included all the different rules of grammar, which explained, with examples that were used, all the different principles of grammar according to the holy names of the Lord. And this style of grammar is known as Harinamamrita Vyakarana. And to this day, it's still used as a syllabus in schools in Bengal. This is just some of the long-term effect of Jiva Goswami. But anyway, back to our story. So, in his childhood like this, he made himself deities of Krishna and Balaram. Now, one might think this is a little unusual. How is it that a child can make deities? When I was staying in St. Louis just some years ago before moving to Alachua, we had one family that lived some distance, actually the next state over. And they lived on their own. They didn't have any temple nearby, but the family was very Krishna conscious. They had 3 or 4 children. And the kids had each made for themselves deities of Krishna, or deities of Radharani, or deities of Nrsingadev. Some of them were simply clothespins with matchsticks stuck in and then painted nicely. Some of them were much more elaborate that the older children had made. And in this way they formed their own deities. Now, it doesn't mention here what type of deities or what their appearance was, but simply that he formed his own deities of Krishna and Balaram. Now we can imagine with the pure devotion that was present in his heart, these are very wonderful deities. So it mentioned that while he worshipped these deities, oftentimes he would cry during the worship of these deities of Krishna and Balaram. He would offer different clothing to them, and he would arrange for putting chandan on their forehead and on their lotus feet, and decorating them with flowers, and he had a variety of ornaments and necklaces like that. And then he would prepare tasty sweets to offer to Krishna and Balaram. And then after those were offered, he would take a taste just to see, oh yes, these are very nice. And then he would distribute that Mahaprasad to all of his friends and his playmates. And it came to be that everyone in the town hankered for the sweets that he would offer to his deities. In addition to this, he would organize play games with the children that were all based upon the pastimes of Krishna and Balaram. So in this way, his entire youth like this was done in this way. And he was so attached to these deities of Krishna and Balaram, when he would take rest at night, he would sleep with them. And he would put one in each arm. These were, child's deities, but he would put one in each arm and lay down in bed with them. And thinking this was very cute and trying to make some arrangement for his pleasure, the father would let him do this. But then after he fell asleep, the father would go in and try and take them away. Or maybe it was the uncle or the house servant, because the father had gone away with Rupa and Sanatan. But at any rate, the elders would try to remove these deities from his arms. They could not budge them from his grip. He so tightly had grasped them to his chest. So, very, very nicely. In this way, we find also in Bhakti Ratnakar, there's a description of a dream that he had. And in this dream, he saw his deities of Balaram and Krishna take the forms of Nitai and Gauranga. And then they began dancing very wonderfully. And this completely filled his heart with great joy. And then in their dancing, they took the dust of their lotus feet and they gave it upon the head of Jiva Goswami. And then they disappeared from his vision. So this wonderful dream was a great source of solace to Jiva Goswami. And at this point, he had wanted to leave his family life. But as I mentioned, that he had this responsibility to take care of his father. So he began thinking, when will I be able to crawl out of this well of family life and devote my full time and energy, my very self, to serving these two most magnanimous lords? But, as we mentioned, he was the only son of the entire family. The father and uncles had departed. He had a responsibility to take care of his aged mother. And so, in this way, he continued. Then, of course, as I mentioned, he learned that his father had passed away. And his whole life became filled with this utter sadness that we hinted to earlier. So some of the friends, observing this condition of Jiva Goswami, suggested that he should go to Navadvip. And because he was so devoted to Krishna and Balaram, and many people understood the presence of Gaurnitai as Krishna and Balaram, devotees, because he was so devoted, he should go to Navadvip and bathe himself in the coolness that emanated from the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda. And in this way, maybe the burning grief that had gripped his mind and racked his body might be a little bit refreshed. So Jiva Goswami took this advice, and along with some pilgrims, he left the next time pilgrims went to go to Navadvip. Now, Nityananda Prabhu at this time had been living in Kardaha. Kardaha was where he had established his home after marrying Janava and Vasudha. And he was residing there, and he knew, he knew that now is the time that Jiva is going to go to Navadvip. Let me also leave and meet him there. So, of course, Nityananda arrived there early, and he was staying at the house of Srivas Pandit. And while staying there at the house, he was inquiring that as soon as Jiva arrives, let me know. So Jiva Goswami, in due course of time, Sri Jiva as he was called at the time, he arrived, and immediately upon coming to Navadvip and seeing the banks of the Ganga, he threw himself into the banks of the Ganga and placed the water of the Ganga on his head and began to bathe in it. He was so happy and satisfied to be there. So in this way, villagers from all directions saw this young saintly boy of such elevated position, and they came and they were so happy to see him, and he offered his dandabats to all, and then he requested, can you please take me to where Nityananda is staying? So they took him to the house of Srivas Pandit. And upon arriving there, Nityananda came out and greeted him, and he fell down in the dust at the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda, took the dust from those feet and placed it upon his own head. He was so happy and joyful. And Nityananda, it mentions, picked him up and embraced him and said, are you the nephew of Rupa and Sanatan Goswamis? So he asked him like that. So Jiva Goswami humbly admitted this was who he was. So Nityananda brought him into the house and set him down and received him nicely, gave him something to drink to relieve his fatigue from traveling, and inquired from him about the welfare of the entire family in Ramkeli, how all the different devotees were doing. And then he introduced Jiva Goswami to each of the devotees who were there. And of course, all the different devotees living in Navadvip at that time had come to see this wonderful exchange between Nityananda and Jiva. So he was introduced to each of them and offered his prostrated obeisances before each devotee in this way. He was very happy to meet them, and they were equally happy to meet the famed nephew of Rupa and Sanatan. So after this reception, they had arranged for special prasadam that had been Nityananda's Mahaprasad to be given to Jiva Goswami, and he sat down and very happily ate this. So the next day, he took rest that evening after traveling, and the next day Nityananda arranged to take him to the house of Sachimata. Sachimata was still residing on the planet at that time, but she was very old and very frail. She'd become quite thin, and her hair, it was difficult to tell which was her white hair and which was her white sari. Her hair had become so white, and she would be sitting there, and she had on a beautiful silken white chadar, and Nityananda came and went to the house, and it mentions that Jiva Goswami was so satisfied to see Mother Sachi that there was a large courtyard in her home, and devotees were gathered, and they were singing the glories of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And seeing Nityananda, everyone stood up and received him very nicely, and then fell down and offered their dandabats, their obeisances. And then Jiva Goswami went and offered his obeisances to Sachimata, who was sitting on the veranda in the assembly of these devotees. It mentions that even though she was so elderly and so thin, that her body was effulgent with the Shakti, with the energy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So she sat down, and upon seeing Nityananda, she began to remember once again the presence, by seeing Nityananda, the presence of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and became completely overwhelmed in a mood of separation. So Nityananda came, and she took her sari, it mentions, and covered her head and bowed before Nityananda. And then she called her servant Ishan, Ishan Prabhu, Shripad has arrived, please arrange prasad for him. You remember he was known as Shripad. This was the name Nityananda was affectionately known by in Navadvip. And Ishan, of course, was the aged servant that stayed. He was the servant of Jagannath Mishra and Mata Sachi. And then when Jagannath Mishra passed away, then he stayed with the young boy Nimai and his mother. And then when Nimai left and took sannyas, then he stayed and served Sachimata. And even after Sachimata departed, he stayed and maintained the home. There are stories of how the different Goswamis, Narottam, Srinivas, came and visited him, different devotees like that. So in this way, after she gave these instructions, she set Nityananda down and ordered Ishan, now please wash his feet. So the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda were washed by Ishan, and then Ishan departed to begin to prepare prasad. So Nityananda then, of course, after he was received in this way, he offered his respects to Mother Sachi, the mother of the Supreme Lord, and then he sat down and took his seat. Then he introduced Jiva Goswami to Sachimata. He introduced Jiva Goswami to Sachimata, and she was so happy to receive him. And she requested the two of them, now you both please sit and honor the prasadam of the Lord. She said, take prasadam. She addressed Nityananda, but also including Jiva. She said, take prasadam here at your mother's house today. I have offered these preparations to Lord Gaurasundar. In her mind, she was always offering these different preparations to the Lord like this. So it mentions that for some days, Jiva Goswami stayed there in Navadvip, and Lord Nityananda took him around to the 9 islands, to all the different holy places of the Lord's pastimes there, and visited one by one, and Lord Nityananda would tell that this place, this pastime happened, and this is where he delivered Jagai and Madhai, and this is where he chastised Gopal Champu, and he would go like this, and Gopala Chapala, and he would go from place to place and tell all the pastimes. This is the home of Srivas, where the kirtans went on throughout the night. And Jiva Goswami, Sri Jiva was receiving such satisfaction from hearing these pastimes. So after doing all this and taking him around like this, then Nityananda told him, he said, now you should set out for Varanasi. Because in Varanasi you can study the Vedanta Sutras under the instruction of Madhusudana Vaschapati. You might remember from the discussions of Rupa Goswami that Madhusudana Vaschapati was the direct disciple of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and he had stayed there in Varanasi to instruct the devotees like that. So in this way Jiva left there, and he went to Varanasi, and he was introduced, and for some time he stayed and studied Srimad Bhagavatam, of course, which is the Sonam Bonam of the Vedanta Sutra, under Madhusudana Vaschapati, and he explained to him, as Mahaprabhu had explained, all the different fine principles that had been taught by Mahaprabhu to Bhattacharya, and by the Bhattacharya to Madhusudana, and then Madhusudana then established those and taught them to Jiva, who in due course of time mastered all of these conclusions very, very expertly. So from here, it mentions that Jiva Goswami set out for Vrindavan. Now you can imagine, if you just think for a moment in your mind's eye, Jiva Goswami has met Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's a little boy, but the impression has been left in his mind. His uncles, Rupa and Sanatan, and his father, Ballabha, have left the homestead and have gone to Vrindavan for the purpose of serving Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu there, and writing the devotional literatures and uncovering the holy places like this. All of his life he's wanted nothing more than to go to Vrindavan and join them. So now, having this opportunity, being instructed by Nityananda, he's now gone to Vrindavan. And he's on the way. You could just imagine the complete feeling of satisfaction, of bliss that would be there in his heart as he traveled day by day, getting closer and closer, step by step, to that most holy of places, Vrindavan Dham. So finally he arrived in Vrindavan, and he went and he found Rupa and Sanatan, and took shelter at the lotus feet of his 2 uncles, and was just greatly satisfied to have their association. They were, of course, equally pleased to see him, and they received him with great happiness, and then set him down and inquired about all the different devotees, and news from Ramkeli, and how everyone was doing, and what was the news from Navadvip, where he had just come from, and how were things going in Varanasi. So in this way they spent many hours talking about the Vaishnavas, and getting the news about what was going on in the lives of the different devotees in this right way. So, after some time, Jiva settled in, and like that he began to serve the devotees there, and he stayed particularly with Rupa Goswami. And Rupa Goswami began to teach him Srimad Bhagavatam. Now we remember that this was the source of great satisfaction in his childhood, in his youth, and then he was given the conclusions Mahaprabhu taught on the Bhagavat by Madhusudan there in Varanasi. And so now in Vrindavan, Rupa Goswami, who's been directly instructed by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is sharing all this wonderful information about the Srimad Bhagavatam. Rupa Goswami noted that Jiva very quickly became conversant with all of the proper conclusions of Srimad Bhagavatam. So Rupa Goswami engaged him in proofreading his work, the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And at that time, Jiva Goswami compiled a commentary, not immediately there, but in due course of time, he compiled a commentary on Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and that was called the Dugama Sagamani. And this was done after Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu was done, of course, Rupa Goswami engaged him, then he wrote this, and then after that, Sanatana Goswami also compiled the Vaisnava Toshani, and he had him, which is a commentary in the 10th canto, and he had Jiva Goswami also proofread that. And then it mentions that after proofreading that, under the order of Sanatana Goswami, Jiva compiled a commentary on that called the Lagu Vaishnava Toshani. So these were the writings of the Goswamis. They placed in the hands of Jiva for proofreading, and then being so satisfied with his service that way, they encouraged him, now you write a commentary on what we've written. So very, very great level of respect they had for each other. Not in the mood of, oh, he's our nephew, he's a junior, he just give him some service to do, but appreciating his scholarly position, they engaged him in this different way like that. And it mentions that the expertise of Jiva Goswami captivated all the men of learning that were living in Vrindavan. A partial list is given here of some of those persons. Not only Rupa and Sanatan, but Gopal Bhatta, Raghunath Bhatta, Raghunath Das, Krishna Das, Kashishwar Pandit, Madhu Pandit, completely were captivated by his writings. So this was considered to be the beginning of the golden age of Sri Braja Bhumidham. We can just imagine, because Brajadam has been left undeveloped for centuries. And this is the point at which Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu sent his most intimate associates there. He's given them specific services to find the holy places, to write the Vaishnava literatures, to develop the mood of worship, to establish the temples. This is indeed the golden age of Vrindavan. Everything is beginning to blossom. So during this time, mentions that some of the regular services that Jiva Goswami performed for his two uncles, Rupa and Sanatan, is he would bring water from the Jamuna for their baths. He would massage their heads with oil. Srila Prabhupada liked very much to get this oil massage on the head. Very stimulating and also very cooling if it's the right kind of oil, or very warming if it's the right kind, depending on the season. He would clean their ashram, their bhajan kutirs like that. They would engage him in worshiping their deities sometimes. He would cook for them and did the proofreading on their manuscripts. So a large array of services that he performed for Rupa and Sanatan during this time, this golden age of Kali Yuga, golden age of Vrindavan. After some time, being very, very much satisfied with the service of Jiva Goswami, Rupa Goswami initiated him in the divine mantra, and he gave him the service of Sri Sri Radha Damodar. Now, it is indicated in many different shastras and in many different stories and histories of temples that the deity of Damodar was personally fashioned by Rupa Goswami's own hand for his disciple Jiva Goswami specifically to worship. And of course, that deity Radha Damodar is now found in Jaipur. Any of you that have the opportunity to go to Jaipur, you should go and see this deity. It's very, very beautiful. During this time, we did mention that, we mentioned this in connection with Rupa, because during this time, this is when there was an aged Vaishnava named Balabhacharya from a different sampradaya, that he came to visit Rupa Goswami, and they were discussing different points, and Balabha gave a critical correction to something that Rupa had written. And Rupa Goswami took it very well. He wasn't offended by it. He had actually inquired from Balabha, what is the meaning of such? What do you think about this? I don't remember. It doesn't necessarily mention, but there was some discussion amongst friends. And Balabha gave some instruction. I think you should do like this. So, although Jiva Goswami was much younger than Balabha, he followed Balabha out when he left, and he said to him, he said, excuse me, he said, but you've given some correction, some criticism to my uncle. He said, this is not at all appropriate. He actually shouldn't have been spoken to. Jiva Goswami, do you have any idea who he is? Do you have any idea who you're instructing? You should be a little more cautious like this. So Balabha thought about this, and he thought, actually, this is a very good point that this boy Jiva has made. So when he returned sometime later to Rupa, he just mentioned in casual conversation, your disciple Jiva spoke with me, and he was correct. I had acted a bit prematurely in giving you some direction in this way. It wasn't appropriate for me. So then when he left, Rupa Goswami called Jiva, and he could understand what had taken place. And he said to him, he said that, you have acted very much with false ego. You have acted in a very brazen way and have dared to criticize someone who I consider to be my guru. You have criticized him, so that now he has retracted what advice he gave me. I sought his advice and you've criticized him. Therefore, I can understand that you are still filled with pride. You are just a young boy. You have not properly conquered these things. Therefore, you should remove yourself from Vrindavan. You're not fit to live here. So, such a deep scolding. And Jiva Goswami took it very, very seriously. So he left and he went, if I remember, I didn't check this, but if I remember, it was a place near Radhakund, Kishorikund. I think this might have been the place. But anyway, it was off the beaten track. And he went to an abandoned crocodile hole where a crocodile had lived, a cave in the ground, so to speak, and he lived in there. And, actually, it's right here, Nandagat. It's about, about an hour from where Rupa Goswami was staying at that time. So Jiva Goswami went there and stayed at that place and began fasting. And he began fasting so seriously. He subsisted, it mentions, only on wheat flour that he would mix with a little Jamuna water. That's all he would eat. Finished. Once a day. So in this way, all the local residents began to see this devotee Jiva and how advanced and powerful he was. And he was doing these great austerities and living so. And he was beginning to become emaciated. And so they went to Sanatan and they complained. Sanatan, why is he living like this? So Sanatan came to see. And it mentions that Sanatan came and then he brought Jiva back and had him stay outside. And he went into Rupa. And Sanatan said to Rupa, it gives me great pain, but I must point out that you are neglecting one of the instructions of our master, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Rupa Goswami inquired, which instruction is that? And Sanatan said, Jiva Doya, to be kind to all jivas. You have neglected one jiva. And Rupa Goswami could understand what he meant. He said, all right, bring him in. So he brought him back in and embraced him and re-engaged him in his service. Now, Srila Prabhupada makes the following comment about this. I think this is pertinent to mention. He says that Srila Rupa Goswami cast out Jiva Goswami to teach us, the devotees of today, a lesson in humility. It was not done to teach or punish Jiva Goswami, who was already a perfectly liberated soul, an eternal associate of Lord Krishna. Rupa Goswami sent Jiva Goswami out of Vrindavan to teach that all jivas have to, as he wrote in his Upadeshamrita, Vacho Vegam, Manasakroda Vegam, Jiva Vegam, at all times must control the tongue, control the speech, and remain very humble. So this was the lesson that Srila Prabhupada sought that we should learn from this exchange between Rupa and Jiva Goswami, that a devotee should always control his tongue, his speaking, and should always be very conscientious of the speech that he does put out and the impact it will have, and should always be very, very humble in his dealings with others. So, in due course of time, the inevitable took place, and that is that Rupa and Sanatan departed from this world. And when Rupa and Sanatan departed from this world, it was very, very painful for Jiva Goswami. But it mentions that he carried on the tradition that they had already inaugurated in Vrindavan. And at that time, Jiva Goswami, he had become Goswami by that time, was the Gaudiya Sampradaya Acharya. He was the personality that was there to guide all the Vaishnavas in Navadvip, Vrindavan, Jagannath Puri. And although he was the undisputed leader of the Vaishnavas at that time, it mentions he considered himself to be the most humble servant of all the jivas. And whenever the Bengali Vaishnavas would visit, he would lovingly receive them and arrange for their prasadam and for their comfortable rooms and all their accommodations. And he would even personally take them on Braj Mandala Parikram, show them all the different holy places like this. So, in the mood of Jiva Goswami, he would also very soundly present the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, present the teachings of Krishna consciousness. And even to the point he would sometimes engage in debates with different scholars of the Rajputs. One time Jiva traveled to Agra and he was debating there with some Rajputs concerning the glories of the Jamuna and the Ganga River. These Rajputs were establishing that the Ganga River was the most important, the highest river, and that Jamuna was secondary. So in his debate, he established that the Jamuna is more glorious than the Ganga because the Ganga emanates from Krishna's lotus feet, whereas the Jamuna is the actual consort of Krishna. So the Ganga is very glorious, delivers all sins, cleanses every living entity, because it emanates from the lotus feet of Krishna. But the Jamuna is the personal consort of Krishna. It's more intimate. So therefore he established the superiority of the Jamuna River. Now, at this, the Mughal emperor was very, very pleased with the presentation of Jiva Goswami, and he wanted to present him with something special. He asked, please ask anything of me. Now you can just imagine a very, very wealthy king says to you, please ask anything of me. Okay, I'd like a 5 gig iPod, an unlimited collection of, yeah, our mind would start going, right? Jiva Goswami had a very simple request. He said, I would simply like some pieces of blank paper. Now, what is the importance of this request for blank paper? Because paper at that time was very, very rare. No one had paper. Only the wealthiest of men had paper. And this was a very valuable stained type of paper, very beautiful. And he gave a bundle of that to Jiva. Now, at that time, when Jiva would compose, it's an interesting style it mentions that he would compose, is that he would develop an idea in his mind and compose the Sanskrit verses for that, and then write it down without changing anything. And the method of writing it down was they would use a metal stylus, a metal tip, and permanently etch it into a palm leaf. So this, of course, didn't leave any room for erasing or editing or rewriting or running a spell check or any of that type of thing. It's just, boom. Each verse that Jiva Goswami put down was a perfect gem from the very beginning. So there was another opportunity where there was a similar Mughal emperor that wanted to give some benediction to Jiva after some debate. And so he requested for an emperor's order that no living being would be killed by the means of hunting within the land of Braja. And so as a result, the kings could not come to Braj and hunt in the forest there anymore. This was by the arrangement of Jiva Goswami. So, actually, Jiva Goswami is considered, without doubt, to be the greatest scholar, not only in our own opinion as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, but many, many people in the scholastic world that understand the importance of Vedic teaching and contemporary Sanskritologists, they also accept that without a doubt Jiva Goswami was the most advanced and learned scholar that has lived in recent times. Even though he was very young, it mentions that he was the most prolific writer amongst all the Goswamis as well. He wrote an astounding 500,000 Sanskrit verses. 500,000 Sanskrit verses. This comes to a total of 25 books. And his books establish without doubt the supremacy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy and give the essence of Vedic wisdom, the perfection of all religion. There's a long list given of all of the 25 books, but the 3 most prominent books it mentions are his Gopal Champu, the Sat Sandarbhas that he wrote, and the Hadnama Vyakarana. And these are the 3 most famous of his works. The Sandarbhas, of course, their purpose is to firmly establish the transcendental truths of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is Swayam Bhagavan, Sri Krishna himself. So, after some time, we all know the history, as we've spoken about Srinivas, Shamananda, and Narottam, that they were sent one by one to Vrindavan and studied under Jiva Goswami. Although they were each initiated by someone separately, they were placed under the tutelage and care and training of Jiva Goswami. After some time, Acharya Rani Janava Devi, the then at that point widow of Nityananda, and the premier Vaishnavi amongst all the Vaishnavas at that time, she sent a message to Vrindavan requesting that Jiva Goswami should send these boys out and should arrange for them to come and bring the writings, because at that time, you might remember that Krishnadas Kaviraj had just finished his Chaitanya Charitamrita, Rupa and Sanatana have passed on, so all of their books are now available, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Upadeshamrita, Sajjana Toshan, all these different books that have been written. So, and then Jiva Goswami's own writings as well. So Janavamata encouraged that you have copies of these books made and send these boys to bring these books here to Bengal, so that in Bengal we can also appreciate these in Orissa like this. So this was at her request that Jiva Goswami arranged this. Now, when Jiva Goswami began this project of copying the books, it was the beginning of Kartik, beginning of Chaturmasya, excuse me. And of course we know during the Chaturmasya season no one travels, it's raining so much. So at the end of the Chaturmasya season, the last month is called the month of Kartik. And during the month of Kartik, many, many devotees take very serious vratas, very serious vows of austerity and penance and renunciation. And they stay in Vrindavan, in the holy places, Vrindavan, Mayapur, Orissa, wherever, Jagannath Puri, and they perform these different types of austerities. So Jiva Goswami was arranging during this for all the books to be copied, and it was finished on the last of the Kartik at the end of the month. And so he arranged a huge, giant festival at the end of Kartik when the Chaturmasya season had finished, to inaugurate these three boys and their travels and their taking of all the books and going to Bengal and to Orissa to share this knowledge that all the Goswamis had at that time. Big, huge festival. He took the devotees around to the different Vaishnavas residing in Vrindavan at that time, to the different temples to get their blessings. He took them to the different devotees living in Radha Kund. We've mentioned this previously, Raghunath Das, Raghunath Bhatta. Excuse me. He then had all the devotees give their blessings in this way, and he sent them off. And in this way he inaugurated the first Sankirtan party of going out and distributing books to other places than just where the books were. Now, there's three particular bogus arguments that envious persons present about Jiva Goswami. And I mention these simply to educate us as to the personalities that may offer some criticism. And should we be in a situation where we hear these, then we can be able to properly speak about them. It's part of learning about this. The first is the story about Vallabha. The criticism is that the reason that Jiva Goswami was sent out was because he was very prideful. And this pride had spoiled his devotional mood, and therefore Rupa Goswami threw him out of Vrindavan. Of course, if we read the story completely, Sanatana's bringing Rupa Goswami back shows how he forgave him and accepted him again. That's the first story that's told. I'll speak about each of these at the beginning. The second story is that it's told that when Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami finished his Chaitanya Charitamrita, he brought the finished copy to Jiva Goswami to see. And Jiva Goswami read it, and the story is that Jiva Goswami read it and could understand this work is of such a sublime nature, it'll surpass anything I'm doing. Therefore it can't be distributed, and he threw it into the well. And that by throwing that into the well, it shocked Krishnadas Kaviraj so much that he died. Now, of course, this story takes very, very little chronological or historical reading to find it to be completely bogus as well. And the third story is that they accuse that Jiva Goswami did not believe in Parakiya Ras, but only in Svakhiya Ras. Parakiya Ras is the relationship of Krishna with the gopis, the unmarried gopi girls, and the sublime highest pinnacle of relationships with the Lord. Svakhiya Ras is Krishna's relationship with the married wives that he had. So some people accuse that Jiva Goswami did not accept Parakiya Ras, which is accepted by all the Gaudiya Vaishnava literatures as the highest. Lord Chaitanya himself said, Gopi Bhartur Padakamalaya Dasa Dasa Nudasa. That the gopis have the highest love for Krishna, and that one should follow in their footsteps. So this argument is properly countered by the fact that Jiva Goswami had some immediate followers that were very much disturbed by this Parakiya Ras. And therefore, to satisfy them, he also supported the point of Svakhiya Ras, but never in exception to or neglect of. Now, anybody that understands these stories, the Acharyas, starting with Bhaktivinoda Thakur, many places in his writings, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and Srila Prabhupada have all very thoroughly smashed these bogus ideas in their writings. We just quoted earlier the story that Srila Prabhupada gave of his explanation of the importance of this Balaba story and how this was an example of devotee developing humility. So, if you should ever hear these three stories, this is a good opportunity to know that they're completely bogus. So, this is just a bit about the life of Jiva Goswami that we've touched on this evening. Jiva Goswami lived for 85 years. He departed this world in Vrindavan, and his samadhi is there in Vrindavan, a very wonderful place to go and visit. And during his time, as we mentioned, he wrote 25 different books. And in finishing, I would like to read a very beautiful song that he wrote glorifying his lords Krishna and Balaram. And this is also from the Bhakti Ratnakar, page 235. Here we go. This is a song from his Gopal Champu, the 12th chapter, and this is a song glorifying Krishna and Balaram. As his friends sing many songs, Krishna eagerly plays with Balaram. He sings like the bees and the cuckoos. He talks like the swans and the parrots. In this way, he imitates the calls of the Chakravakas, the Chakoras, the Bakas, and the other birds. He laughs as he debates with these birds. Roaring like a tiger, he then frightens the cows and the cowherd boys. Every day he would speak with the birds, the deer, and the other animals. He would call each of these animals by name. If one of his friends would wander away, he would affectionately pull him back to the group of boys and laugh heartily. By name he called a cow that would wander far away. The musical sound of his call would delight the cows and the cowherd boys alike. When he would call a cow, the peacocks all would reply in a great tumult of different responsive calls. Taking his brother by the hand, he would laugh and praise each of his friends. Making him lie down and rest with his friends, he would massage his noble brother's feet. He would then lie down on a nice bed of leaves and rest his head on the lap of a cowherd friend. Tired from playing, he would take rest. The most pure, saintly persons would fan his body as he rested. Some boys would massage his feet. These servants create in us a desire to be like them. Pleased by the singing of his loving friends, Krishna would then sleep. May we always remember these pastimes of Krishna and the cowherd boys. Our hearts cannot bear to think of anything else. Who are we to yearn after these things? These are the desires of Sukadev Goswami and a host of other very fortunate saints. So we close this evening with that wonderful prayer of Jiva Goswami glorifying his lords of his life, Krishna and Balaram. Let's take a look here and see if we have any questions on the chat room this evening. I see we have a few new faces here. Question for whoever can answer. Benares is on the shores of the Ganga, and the Ganga is Shiva's hair. See if Shiva was in ancient times. So, Kevan has asked us about the city of Benares and the Ganga. And because the Ganga comes from Lord Shiva's hair, you may know the story that when Ganga Devi came, she said, the force of my arriving in the earth will be so strong it will destroy the planet. So Shiva agreed, I will take that on my head. And that's why we see the Ganga flowing off of his hair like that. So his question is, since the city of Benares is the place of the Ganga, and the Ganga is Shiva's hair, was it more of a city for Shiva devotees than Vaishnavas in ancient times? Well, I'll be the first to admit that I have no ability to answer that question. It is true that in Benares there are many impersonalists, there are many Shivites, there are many Vaishnavas. It is a very multiple doctrine city, if you will. As far as whether it was more of a city of Shivites or not, I'm not well versed enough in the history of Varanasi to answer that. If anyone else out there in our chat room has any additional questions or would like to pose any information they have about Jiva Goswami, we'll be happy to hear from you. Otherwise, if nothing is there, we have gone a little later this evening because we started a little later, so we get the same amount of time either way. And we want to thank all of you very much, our usual group of devotees that fill in on the chat room, as well as any new guests that are there. And we want to request all of you to join us again next Monday for another evening in the lives of the Vaishnavacharyas. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Just as we went off the air, we got another question in, and so we've jumped back on the air just to answer the question. The question came from our longtime friend, Mauricio, and he was asking what really happened to the Chaitanya Charitamrita when Krishnadas Kaviraj brought it to Jiva Goswami. Well, I'll tell you the truth. I know the story to be bogus, so I don't know if Krishnadas Kaviraj actually even brought the Chaitanya Charitamrita to Jiva Goswami to look at. As Jiva Goswami did proofread many of the writings of the Vaishnavas at that time, it wouldn't be far to ascertain that he did. But we do know that Jiva Goswami did arrange for the copying of Chaitanya Charitamrita because it was in the books that were sent off with the boys. So there was no, as I say, there was no despondent mood of, oh, my fame will be eclipsed by throwing this out. So that's all that I know on that subject. But once again, we'll join you next Monday. Hare Krishna.